Throughout the first day, we witnessed many intellectually stimulating discussions by local and foreign delegates on the theme of holistic approach to national growth and security. Today, as we further explore the problems of our generation in order to find resolutions for the future, we invite you to join us as we discuss under the theme of approaches to national security and leadership roles. Ladies and gentlemen, let me humbly invite Brigadier R.G.U. Rajapaksha, the Dean, Faculty of Graduate Studies, to introduce the chair for the session. Over to you, sir.
Distinguished invitees, students of General Surgeon Kottala Defense University, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, I welcome you all to the Defense and Strategic Studies Technical Session 2 of the KDU International Research Conference 2020, in which presenters will deliver their papers on the sub-theme Approaches to National Security and Leadership Roles. It is my pleasure to introduce the chairperson of the session, Mr. Bernard Gunathilaka, Chairman, Pathfinder Foundation, to the audience. A graduate in history and postgraduate in international relations, The Hague, Mr. Bernard Gunathilaka spent nearly 4 decades as an officer of the Sri Lanka Foreign Service. Following his retirement, he was appointed Chairman of the Sri Lanka Institute of Tourism and Hotel Management, and later Chairman of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority and Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, which positions he held concurrently from 2008 to 2010. His career as a Foreign Service officer began in 1970 and included postings to the Sri Lanka diplomatic missions in Kuala Lumpur, New York, Bangkok, Washington, D.C., Geneva, and Beijing. He held several positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including the post of Director General Multilateral Affairs from 1997 to 2000, and ending as Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2003 to 2004. During his career, ladies and gentlemen, he served as permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the UN in Geneva from 1992 to 1997, during which period he was concurrently accredited to the Holy See and as permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations in Vienna. Later, he served as Sri Lanka's ambassador to People's Republic of China from 2000 to 2003, during which assignment he was concurrently accredited as ambassador to the People's Republic of Mongolia and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He also served as acting permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the UN in New York from 2004 to 2005, and ended his diplomatic career as ambassador to the United States of America from 2005 to 2008. Following the signing of the ceasefire agreement between the government and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam in 2002, he headed the Secretariat for coordinating the peace process and functioned as one of the 4 members of the government negotiating team with LTT since May 2010. He functioned as chairman Pathfinder Foundation, which has forged relationship with large number of think tanks and educational institutions in Australia, China, Iran, Singapore, Russian Federation, and the United States of America. He also functions as director of several companies associated with MMBL Pathfinder Group of companies. While thanking you, sir, for being here with us today, accepting our invitation, I now cordially invite you to the stage and chair the Defense and Strategic Studies Technical Session 2. Meantime, I would like to call upon our eminent guest speakers. Most of them are online. in this session. Ms. K.E.R.L. Fernando, Mr. P.R. Gunaratna, Mr. T. Amunugama, Lieutenant Commander B.A.R.S. Bamanu Singha, Ms. G.D.N. Sanjeevani, Ms. A.A.B.D.P. Abhivardhan. So I kindly invite you on the stage. Mr. Bernard Gunatilaka will also introduce the presenters of the session to the audience.
Good morning, Brigadier Rajapaksa, Dean of the Faculty, members of the panel, distinguished participants. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for inviting me to take part in this event this morning. And from the looking at the participation, I am likely to believe that it is going to be a very interesting session we are going to have this morning. I have had the opportunity to go through the several papers or the synopsis of the papers that is to be presented this morning by 5 or 6 presenters. And I find that during this session, participants will receive an exposure to actually 6 different oral representations, covering a wide variety of subjects and issues, ranging from COVID-19 to international power game, foreign policy making, role of the private security sector, nuclear power, national security and policies adapted towards Libya. Speaking of the COVID-19, the Spanish flu snuffed out the lives of many millions almost a century ago. Despite the enormity of the pandemic, we are still not certain how and where it originated or how many millions succumbed to that pandemic. Other than coming up with figures ranging between 50 million casualties, some even say it goes up to 100 million. Since then, the world has seen and experienced the onslaught of numerous pandemics, such as SARS, MERS, Ebola, and several other viral diseases, competing with the humans for space. As we face off the current challenge, we also have to be prepared for the next wave of pandemics that may visit us in the not too distant future. Coming as I do from a foreign policy background, I look forward to the presentation devoted to the Sri Lankan foreign policy making and the role of leadership. As you would recall, during the formative years of the country, Sri Lankan leaders played an important foreign policy role quite successfully, which trend lasted till at least 1970s. Imagine a country which signs an external affairs agreement and a defense agreement with the colonial power in 1947, prior to the independence, deciding to enter into an agreement with the People's Republic of China known as Communist China then by the Western circles, which came to be popularly known as Rubber Rice Pact, while the Korean War was still raging. So despite the relationship or close relationship what we had with the West at that time, we decided to sign that agreement and earn the anger of the United States, which resulted in having sanctions against Sri Lanka by that country. But what is almost forgotten by us is the fact that that particular action by Sri Lanka did not end there. A short period after that, several months, maybe about 7 or 8 months later, in 1953, we had a very distinguished visitor in Sri Lanka. He was none other than Richard Nixon, Vice President of the United States visiting Colombo. I don't think we have had any such visit since 1953 to date. So that gives us an indication the importance of Sri Lanka as we see today. Last week we had a visitor from a senior level visitor from China. End of the month we are expecting a senior visitor from the United States, and sometime later we are expecting another visitor from India. And while this drama is now being played out, we see a situation, a similar situation that happened in early 50s. And of course, Vice President Nixon did not stay like what our next visitor is going to do, stay for 10-15 hours in the island. He spent 3 long days. And so we have to conclude that it would have been a very important mission for the United States to send an important visitor to engage in important discussions. And we are certain, or at least we have information, that Vice President Nixon tried to persuade then our Prime Minister, Sir John Kotalawala, to refrain or walk away from that agreement what we signed with China. But we did not. And of course, that particular decision helped us at a particular important decision, important stage for Sri Lanka's economy, and also political independence as we see it. So what is important is the decisions taken by the political leadership at a particular time helps a country to walk the kind of a tightrope. Similarly, subsequently, I think during Mrs. Bandaranaike's time, we see what we call 1964 Sirima Sastry Pact, and 10 years later we signed the Sri Lanka-India Maritime Boundary Agreements in 1974 and 1975. Which all these things were done in a very cordial and friendly manner. So this demonstrates the fact that our political leadership at that time played a very important and a crucial role. What happens after that particular period, 1970, is something I think that we will have to study very carefully. I note that there is another presentation devoted to national security of Sri Lanka. This is a subject that has received the attention of policymakers after experiencing the damage suffered by the country due to lax interest paid by the security apparatus to such an important issue. The price the country paid in human lives and the economic cost of that incident is enormous. Against this backdrop, the government will have to focus on structural arrangements that are necessary to address the current dynamics and come up with solutions. With these preliminary remarks, I will conclude my address, and let us begin with the technical session 2, approaches to national security and leadership roles. The time allocated to each panelist is something like 10 minutes. Given the time constraints, I hope the panelists would stick to the time limit given. And the first presentation will be by Carl Fernando and R. Fernando. And Carl Fernando is an attorney at law who holds LLB and E-Diploma in HR and reading for LLM in Criminal Justice and Administration, and MSc in Security and Strategic Studies. She is a researcher who has presented several papers at many international conferences and symposiums, who has been awarded Best Presenter and Best Poster Presentation Award during her undergraduate period at international research symposiums. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Chair, researchers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. First of all, let me share my presentation to the audience. The topic of this research is analyzing COVID-19 as a modern strategy in international power game. This is a combined research paper with Senior DIG Roshan Fernando, who was on a special assignment on the prevention of the spread of COVID-19 in Sri Lanka Police. COVID-19 is the shortened form of coronavirus disease of 2019. It is also called as SARS-CoV-2 or novel or new coronavirus. Beginning in December 2019, it was first found in the region of Wuhan, China. World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic in March 2020. The word pandemic is a combination of two Greek terms, pan, which means all, and demos, means people. As per Kelly, pandemic is an epidemic occurring worldwide or over a very wide area, crossing international boundaries and usually affecting a large number of people. It is important to note that, apart from the concerns on world health security, COVID-19 was able to create chaos in the international power game since Western politics accused China as responsible for the pandemic. Some even pointed out this was not just a virus, it was an artificial virus invented to use as a biological weapon. Therefore, in this backdrop, the problem statement of this study is to find out whether COVID-19 is used as a modern strategy in international power game. Therefore, what is the evolution of the virus, and can China be accused for hiding information, are the research questions to be answered to solve the problem statement. This is an explorative study, and the research methodology adopted in this study is qualitative, based on secondary sources of media and internet. Before moving on to discuss about the virus, it seems very important to draw the attention to the modern strategies used in international power rivalry. Modern strategies in international power game are more towards soft power, which broadly refers to the ability to shape the preferences of others. And COVID-19 has shaped how nations exercise soft power as a modern strategy. Next, analyzing the evolution of COVID-19 would assist to evaluate its role as a modern strategy. Accordingly, three arguments are being widely aired. First, it is a natural virus. Secondly, it may have been the result of an accident at a biosafety level 4 lab in Wuhan. Thirdly, China deliberately launched a biological attack. Several opinions support the fact that COVID-19 is a natural virus. According to Carbonaro, world is convinced that COVID-19 evolved naturally. As per Wood, it could not have started from inside a lab with the most likely cause animal interaction. Actually, the third viewpoint suggests that bat coronavirus has close parental ties with SARS-CoV-2, and these genetic differences are too big to assume that SARS-CoV-2 could have been elaborated in a lab by human hand. Therefore, it suggests that this virus was first evolved through animals, especially the bats, and due to the food habits of Chinese. Second argument is that COVID-19 had been a result of an accident at a biosafety level 4 lab in Wuhan. This accepts the fact that it is an artificial virus. As per Wood, one of the Ukraine's top scientists has poured the idea that COVID-19 could be an artificially constructed virus or a biological weapon. As per Tara, the lab in Wuhan is the result of a collaborative effort with France after the first SARS outbreak in 2002. The lab is one of the 20 such facilities under the Chinese Academy of Sciences, but is the only one dealing with virology. One of the most persistent has been the suggestion that COVID-19 is a bioweapon. Bioweapon is defined by World Health Organization as microorganisms like virus are produced and released deliberately to cause disease and death in humans, animals, or plants, which can pose a difficult public health challenge, causing large numbers of deaths in a short amount of time while being difficult to contain. Significance of biological weapons are that it can cause widespread casualties with minimal logistic requirements. As seen on the slide, the cost effectiveness of bioweapons are elaborated by Afzal as cost of 50% casualties per meter square is $1 US dollar as compared to conventional weapons $2,000, nuclear armaments $800 US, chemical agents $600 US. As per Komisarenko, reported by Wood,
Aisha, please go ahead.
sorry for the disturbance. As per Komisarenko, reported by Wood, the first really dangerous outbreak of a coronavirus was in China 2002. And there was an international idea to make the research institute in China, which will be looking for the possible further outbreaks of coronavirus infection. This institute was collaborating with scientists from different countries. Just recently with France. They were cooperating with United States scientists, with Australian scientists, and with others. Can you imagine it making biological weapons in cooperation with scientists from different countries? No, not at all. This provides a plausible explanation on bioweapon accusations against China. Next is to answer whether China can be held guilty for hiding information. In initial responses to COVID-19, both Chinese President and US President started off with denial and misinformation. In 1986, during Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine, there were accusations against the Soviet Union on how they tried to cover up nuclear disaster by hiding information. Thus, in comparing Chernobyl disaster with COVID-19, after identifying the virus, China publicized information about the virus and also assisted the world with medical support. China was 3 months ahead of facing COVID-19 than other countries on the curve of the virus progression. Moreover, this was not the very first time China was experiencing such. Considering all these, therefore, in comparison to the situation occurred in Chernobyl, China cannot be held responsible for such regarding COVID-19. In the viewpoint of international geopolitics, US is considered as a superpower, whereas China is considered as the rising power in the world power game. In discussing about COVID-19 in international power game, as per Aslam, not long ago, the American media revealed that senior US officials had handed down documents to a number of federal agencies requesting all federal employees to speak consistently about the pandemic and blame China for everything. After the World Health Organization and the scientific circle named the novel coronavirus as COVID-19, still some American politicians insisted on calling it the Chinese virus. Moving on, economics play a major role in international power game. And China being the world factory, when world is affected, it has adverse effects on Chinese economy too. However, China made half of the world masks before the coronavirus emerged there, and it has expanded production nearly 12-fold since then. This created mask diplomacy, also called as pandemic diplomacy or COVID diplomacy, which the virus has made foreign aid a more public tool. Ultimately, this led to strengthen the Chinese economy even during the pandemic, which led to
Excuse
further
me,
depreciation.
you are almost past your time allotted to you, so could you kindly complete your presentation? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Finally, this study being an explorative study, it is apparent that even though COVID-19 was first found in Wuhan, China, yet the evolution is debatable whether it is a natural virus or an artificial one. Thus, no conclusive evidence to prove the fact that COVID-19 is a biological weapon. Further, despite USA accusations against China of misinformation of the virus, no supportive facts have been found to hold China guilty. With all these, it is ultimately evident how COVID-19 as a soft power has been used against China as a modern strategy in international power game. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation on a very topical subject, COVID-19. I remember the last General Assembly of the United Nations where the President of the United States directly accused China, calling it China virus, and saying that China deliberately brought it to the surface and distributed among the world. The interesting aspect is there is a discussion whether calling it China virus is the right thing. Generally accepted position is not. Then of course people go back to the, I think 100 years ago and say we call it Spanish flu, which killed almost 50 million people. Then of course there is a reason why it was called Spanish flu. It did not originate in Spain, but Spain was the country which played a neutral part during the World War I to admit publicly that there was a thing like this going on in that particular society. but even to this date, we do not know where it started from. Some say it is in France, some say it is somewhere in Europe. So there is a lot that we do not know about this virus. For example, in this particular case, COVID-19, we know it started in Wuhan. It is alleged that bat was the cause. There are talks that it was artificially developed one, not a natural one, but of course the presenter very clearly indicated that it could not be the case. But of course, such developments are being used by interested parties for political accusation, and we are very clear about that situation going into the presentation made by President Trump during the last General Assembly. I was reading an article about this particular flu, and it says the strand of flu did not just disappear. I was wondering how it came to an end. I'm talking about the Spanish flu. The influenza virus continuously mutated, passing through humans, pigs, and other mammals. The pandemic level virus morphed into just another seasonal flu, and it goes on to say the 1918 flu is still with us. In that sense, it never went away. So the interesting aspect is we are talking about something that happened 100 years ago, and we have an idea of as to what happened. And the most important factor is it has got weakened over the years or the decades or over the last century, but the virus is still with us. So maybe 100 years from now, we will be still talking about C19, and still there will be things that we do not know about the COVID-19 many decades from now. So such is the behavioral pattern of virus. With that, may I now invite our second presenter, P.R. Gunaratna and M. Malegoda. The author is a visiting lecturer in international relations at the Department of International Relations, University of Colombo. He has conducted a number of guest lectures at BIDTI and the Army Staff College. His research interests include international security, foreign policy, nuclearization, and public international law. He has produced many international and local journal publications to his credit. Mr. Peshan Rajendra Gunaratna is a life member of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and the Royal Asiatic Society of Sri Lanka. At present, he is a doctoral candidate at the Faculty of Graduate Studies of the University of Colombo. You have the floor, sir.
Rajendra, you can start your presentation.
Yes. The Chair, the Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies, Professor Amal Jayawardena, other members of the faculty, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce you into my study titled The Impact of Leader Images in Sri Lanka Foreign Policy Making from 2005 to 2019. Since the advent of Sri Lanka as a modern nation state in the modern Westphalian international system in 1948, Sri Lanka, under different heads of state with different political complexions, professed, I emphasize, professed a foreign policy of non-alignment or neutrality. Sri Lanka, until it became a republic in 1972, Sri Lanka's foreign policy architects were mainly the British. And even after Sri Lanka declared itself a republic in the 1970s, Sri Lanka's foreign policy was mainly determined by Whitehall. The political elite, simply because the political elite of the country was highly inexperienced and immature with regard to foreign policy matters. Sri Lanka's foreign policy trajectory was basically either pro-West or pro-communist during the Cold War period. This was quite significant during the last couple of centuries. The country was governed by different political parties, particularly the leading political parties, the United National Party and Sri Lanka Freedom Party, whose foreign policies were actually diametrically opposed to each other. Although the country professed a policy of non-alignment or neutrality, and which was quite significant through SWRD Bandaranaike's advocacy of a neutral Sri Lanka and identifying Sri Lanka as the Switzerland of Asia. Sri Lanka was, however, pro-communist, and particularly during the J.R. Jayawardena administration, it was particularly pro-Western, specifically speaking pro-American. So it is quite evident that Sri Lanka, although professed a policy of non-alignment or neutrality, Sri Lanka had to choose either the West or the communist Soviet Union during the Cold War period. And particularly during the present context, the status quo, Sri Lanka will have to either choose the West or China. So this Sri Lanka is a significant actor in international relations. Although Sri Lanka is a small power, Sri Lanka's strategic significance is recognized in most of the occasions in the international arena. From Hillary Clinton's emails, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Lotus Tower, which was built in the central heart of Colombo, at the United Nations Security Council, United Nations Human Rights Council, Sri Lanka surfaced and resurfaced multiple occasions with regard to its controversial foreign policy practice. However, China identified Sri Lanka's strategic significance and made Sri Lanka the linchpin of String of Pearls strategy, and also simply because Sri Lanka is placed at the very heart of international sea lanes of communication. Sri Lanka, the study which I have done on Sri Lanka's foreign policy, particularly between two administrations, that is the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration from 2005 to 2015, and then the Maithripala Sirisena and the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration from 2015 to 2019, is of contemporary relevance, simply because the Sri Lanka's foreign policy was recalibrated, particularly after the defeat of the Tiger terrorists in 2009. So under the Rajapaksa administration, we clearly see a foreign policy shift from non-alignment. And another shift, a U-turn in Sri Lanka's foreign policy could be witnessed in the Maithripala Sirisena and the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration. So the methodology I have used is that this is basically a qualitative case study based on the deductive method. The real approach which I have utilized in this study is the neoclassical realism. So neoclassical realism concentrates particularly on the domestic and individual factors. And basically the leader perception with regard to foreign policy matters is basically based on domestic and individual factors, and also master beliefs. So those are the characteristics of master belief which influence the foreign policy executive of a country, maybe the executive president, the prime minister, or the foreign minister, or the cabinet of ministers, who makes the foreign policy decision. So these foreign policy executives may be influenced by the international milieu, the signals sent by the international community, And if they grasp those signals properly and identify the crux of the issue, and if they can produce a coherent, tangible foreign policy to counter those signals, it will either lead to, the success will lead to the realization of national interests of Sri Lanka, or the failure will lead to the country plunging into a vortex of self-destruction. So the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration is quite significant, as I mentioned earlier, simply because he concluded the war in 2009. So during the latter stage of the war, and also after the protracted conflict, the international community, particularly from Geneva and Washington, exerted pressure based on human rights allegations against Sri Lanka, the United Nations Human Rights Council. So this was grasped by the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration as being contradictory to the national interests of Sri Lanka. Therefore, Mahinda Rajapaksa had to pivot towards China's sphere of influence, thus excluding Sri Lanka from the policy of non-alignment. Thereafter, the Singh administration, who came into power in 2015, practiced a completely opposite or a complete U-turn of Mahinda Rajapaksa's pro-China policy. And this was quite evident through high-level delegations from the United States visiting Sri Lanka at the very inception of the government. Despite the fact that there was a lot of infighting and it was a hamstrung government which was plagued with decision-making gridlock, and when Sirisena and Wickremesinghe, Sirisena as the president and the foreign policy executive, according to the constitution, and Wickremesinghe as the prime minister, could not orchestrate a proper pragmatic foreign policy, although they were successfully able to extricate Sri Lanka from China's orbit and place it in the American orbit. So the main intention or the ulterior motive of these duo was to remove Sri Lanka from the human rights orbit of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which ultimately failed. So Sirisena Wickremesinghe as the president was the foreign policy executive of the country according to the constitution. However, the prime minister was so powerful and he was able to initiate certain foreign policy functions through his foreign minister who belonged to the same party. And each and every one of those foreign policy initiatives were vetoed by the executive president of the country, which was quite reminiscent of this decision-making gridlock which plagued the government at that particular moment. So my basic argument is that the Rajapaksa administration properly identified the signals sent by the international community, and therefore he formulated a pragmatic, coherent foreign policy, thus countering human rights allegations and chartering a successful course through the murky waters of international relations. So Sri Lanka as a small power has no large military as per se. So Sri Lanka will have to highly depend upon the diplomatic dexterity of the country. So Mahinda Rajapaksa was successful in that manner. However, conversely, the Sirisena Wickremesinghe administration was not so successful. They did not properly grasp the signals sent by the West, and they formulated a foreign policy which was diametrically opposed to the aspirations of the citizens of Sri Lanka and contrary to the national interest of Sri Lanka. So that is basically the gist of this study. And the leader perception, therefore, Mahinda Rajapaksa's ability to grasp the signals emanating from the international community, as well as Sirisena Wickremesinghe administration's ability to understand this systemic stimuli, they have led to a proper realization of Sri Lanka's national interest through the practice and the formulation of a pragmatic, coherent, and a tangible foreign policy. However, the failures of Sirisena Wickremesinghe administration's bad foreign policy was it was actually reflected through its election defeat in 2009, where the Sri Lankan public elected another Rajapaksa to head this country.
Thank you very much for your presentation and keeping to the time limit allocated to you. Earlier in my presentation, I just made reference to the foreign policy of Sri Lanka during the formative period. And that was like something like 1947 up to 1970s. The current focus was 2005 to 2019. It's a very important period, really. I would say 2005 to 2009 was one segment, and 2009 to 2014 or 15 was another segment. The peace process basically came to an end by about 2003, 2004, but whether we liked it or not, the government liked it or not, it had to be continued for several more years, although no progress was to be expected given the kind of thinking LTT had at that time. So 2005, with the advent of the new administration, it was a period for the government to consider different kind of tactic, and LTT facilitated that, and of course government forces made use of that situation and brought the conflict to an end by 2009. But what happens since then was very interesting. Instead of praising the government for bringing the conflict to an end, I think the only successful case for Sri Lanka up until that time, we found the United Nations as well as the Western governments taking a different kind of a path, and within about 2 weeks' time after the end of the conflict, the United Nations Human Rights Council decided to convene a special session on the situation in Sri Lanka with a view to finding fault with the government for what it did. And this kind of antagonistic relationship continued till 2014, and by that time, unfortunately, Sri Lanka also made certain mistakes and antagonized India, and as a result, India turned against Sri Lanka, and eventually we have reason to believe that both India and the United States had a hand in the defeat of the Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa's administration at the elections. Very interesting thing happened since then. Until such time, we were considered as very close friends of China. But, and of course, we also must remember that we fought the war with the help that came from China. And I remember by the time I left China as ambassador, the government owed China $200 million for the weapons that they shipped to Sri Lanka to continue the fighting. So with that kind of relationship, we decided to turn our back against China in 2015. And we hoped that the West would come to our rescue and help us to reconstruct. What happened next was, instead of such help, all what we got was advice and admonitions by the West, and eventually maybe another 18 months later, Sri Lanka had to return to China with bended knees and practically asked them to come back and start the work, but they had stopped. So this kind of foreign policy initiatives taken by various administrations at various times contributed to the situation we were in by 2019. And of course, since the presidential election last year and the general election, we have a new administration. And we once again see, as I indicated earlier, international interest in Sri Lanka by the visit of senior level visits from China, USA, and possibly from India. And our president is expected to visit China as well. So we know that we have a important role to play in the international arena, in our international relations, etc. But we should have clear policies as we go along, because we also have a good number of adversaries who would like to pull the country down or push the country down the precipice for a variety of reasons. So one of those situations will emerge in 3-4 months' time, by February, when the Human Rights Council meets again in Geneva. We will have to have a policy and we will have to articulate that policy quite well to the international community, so that they know what our foreign policy is, what our policy is, neutrality is, and what our policy with regard to human rights. So thank you very much for your presentation once again. We now have subject is the role of Sri Lanka's private security sector in assisting nation during pandemics and natural disasters, to be presented by Mr. Amunugama. Tarindu Amunugama is the Managing Director of Red Force Security Services Private Limited and Red Force Training Academy. He is a regular consultant for several international security advisory bodies and is also a member of SLSSPA. He is currently reading for his PhD at the General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University. He currently possesses an MSc in Security and Strategic Studies from the General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University. He also holds a Security Industrial Authority license from the United Kingdom and G4S certificate for team leader training. You have the floor, sir.
Good morning. Greeting to the chairperson, Mr. Bernard Gunateka from the Pathfinder Foundation, and the Dean, Faculty of Graduate Studies, Brigadier Rajapaksha, sir, and fellow faculty members of the forum. Today, I will be presenting the role of Sri Lanka private security sector in assisting the nation during pandemics and natural disasters, what we are facing today. So today, my main focus is the greatest security threat in the world currently facing is the COVID-19 pandemics. So I would be like to share my PowerPoint presentation with you all. Thank you very much.
Haridu, carry on. We can see your slides.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead. Taridu, please go ahead. We can hear you.
Today, the greatest security threat the world is currently facing is the COVID-19 pandemic. Non-traditional security threats such as natural disasters and pandemics which threaten the very survival of humanity have become a focal point in contemporary security studies and analysis. The world faces increasingly complex threats which require holistic and multidimensional solutions. In order to comprehensively prevent and counter such non-traditional threats in today's world, private security companies have become an essential component which is playing an increasingly important role by assisting the states, and non-state organizations to meet the complex and constantly shifting global security challenges. The recent COVID-19 pandemic has proven that private security companies across the globe have become an indispensable part of the national effort in preventing the spread of the virus and helping nations maintain resilience. Sri Lanka has a booming private security industry, and private security companies in Sri Lanka can assist the state by contributing towards achieving resilience during crisis situation while strengthening the human security. Today in Iraq and Afghanistan, the private security companies play a crucial role in assisting humanitarian agencies in providing transportation, security to aid convoys. During the recent conflicts in the Middle East, private security companies have been providing security to foreign aid workers and protection to their office facilities. PSCs also provide security to private business operating in conflict zones and regional affected by violence across the world. Private security companies have played a crucial role in ensuring business continuity while providing safety and security to individuals and organizations. Slide 2. In the globalized and market-driven world we live in today, the number of private security personnel in a country surpasses the number of local police or civilian law enforcement. The private security company industry, which has experienced exponential growth during recent times, is currently employing an estimated 20 million security workers worldwide and is expected to grow even further, 240 billion pounds by 2020. Let us take a look at the number of security personnel in comparison with the strength of the police force in some countries. There is an estimated 20 million private security workers worldwide and is expected to grow even further, $240 billion by 2020. The graph says India 7 million security personnel while they are servicing 1.4 million police officers. China 5 million private security personnel is equal to 2.7 million police officers. US 1.1 million private security personnel is equal to 800,000 police officers. Brazil 1.7 million is 450,000 police. PSCs have become a significant part of the homeland security paradigm, as we know, and it is an essential component in civil security, civil-military relations. The phenomenon known as deputizing, which encompasses the private sector along with citizen and other organizations, serve as a force multiplier for homeland security purposes. On several instances, during natural disaster and pandemics situations, PSCs are employed to act jointly with a range of state actors and NGOs. Right. There are several success stories of private security companies in their handling of natural disasters. And the most recent COVID-19 pandemics, PSCs have been outsourced to handle complex humanitarian emergencies in which the armed forces were assigned functions to work directly alongside civilian partners. The Spanish National Police also coupled the Spanish private security sector, which has deployed over 100,000 guards in managing the COVID-19 crisis and supporting the security forces while they are in the pandemic disaster. New Zealand, which has been one of the most successful countries, is managing the recent COVID-19, lists their private security sector as an essential service. China, which has a private security force which is almost double the strength of their local police, has entrusted the responsibility of controlling movement in urban communities across the country to private security guards. The Indian Union Territory of Puducherry private security guards were given the responsibility to enforce the lockdown and ensuring local distancing was followed in public places. When it comes to Sri Lankan security sector, the origin of Sri Lanka private security sector can be tracked back to 1956, when two school leavers, Newton Senratha and Fort Utuman, who had been rejected by the Sri Lankan police force at the time, established what eventually evolved into an industry that provided employment to thousands today. Based on the Sri Lanka's labor demand, survey 2017 conducted by the Department of Census and Statistics, there were 45,316 vacancies. It was not fulfilled. According to the Industrial Security Foundation, Sri Lanka, over 70,000 security personnel are employed by registered security companies around the island. More than that, the private security sector in Sri Lanka is represented by the Sri Lanka Security Service Providers Association, which is known as SLASPA, and the Industry Security Foundation, which is known as ISF. Both the SLASPA and ISF have played a pivotal role in maintaining the standard professionalism, efficiency, and growth of the private security sector in the country. When it's come to current challenges in Sri Lanka private security industry, some of the challenges Sri Lanka private security are facing is absence of education for security personnel, lack of basic training and standard for recruitment, the lack of career growth, low social appeal to join the private security sector, the lack of innovation within the industry, corruption in tender procedures, so political interferences, market domination by a few large-scale security providers, joint insecurity, low salary scales. Private security in Sri Lanka is not considered as an essential service from the government yet. The contribution of PSCs can provide a state during natural disasters and pandemic situations are as follows below. Security officers are able to provide prompt assistance to victims of disaster and provide safety for individuals, business, and property during such situations. Achieve rapid and effective recovery through research and emergency relief, rescue. Private security can provide immediate assistance to maintain life, improve health, and support the morale of the affected population. Work in collaboration and support the police, armed forces, and disaster management agencies. Assist the mobilizing and evacuating.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. The 10 minutes allotted to you is almost over. Please conclude your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Yes. So in this presentation, what I want to suggest is some of the enhancement from the government and the private security in that era, where national security is challenged by complex threat, which is known as COVID-19 or others. The private security personnel can be used as the first line of defense for the state in overcoming the constantly evolving non-traditional security threats. Thank you very much for.
Thank you for your presentation. As I think we are behind time, we need to move on to the next presenter. A very important factor is the role of the private security sector played in various countries in various ways. There was a mention of Iraq and other places, and we also know that there were also criticism with regard to the role played, particularly in Iraq, by the US security forces. So there are pros and cons. I think we will have to look at all those things and, of course, to find what are the shortcomings and how to address so that this particular sector will make its contribution to the societies of individual countries. Now, may I move on to the next subject, introduction of nuclear power plants to Sri Lanka, national growth and security perspectives by Mr. Bamunu Singha. Mr. Bamunu Singha obtained BSc in Electrical and Electronic Engineering degree from General Sir John Kotelawala Defence University and completed MSc also from the same university. Further, the postgraduate specialization on electrical and electronic has completed from INS Valsura, India, and gunnery engineering course from Naval University of Engineering, Wuhan, China. The author is a chartered engineer and a member of Institution of the Engineers in both Sri Lanka and India. Being a naval officer, the author has rendered his services for more than 17 years in various naval bases in the country and was a lecturer and degree program coordinator. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, sir, Chairperson, Mr. Bernard Gunatilaka, and all the participants. Good morning, all of you. And I wish that you will entertain uninterrupted power supply during this session. Why? Because I'm going to talk about electricity and how it is important and what are the what we can do with this nuclear power plant to Sri Lanka. So with that introduction of nuclear power plants to Sri Lanka, national growth and security perspective, that is my topic. With that, I think I will first draw your attention on this saying, that is US Senator Tom Allen once said that our national security depends on energy security. So he is telling about US condition, so how much they are interested on this energy security and the importance of that. So with that, I would like to draw your attention that energy security is an element. It's an element of the national security, and it's essentially required for economic growth of the country and economic security especially. And we have seen that in the world, in energy demand, it has been increased, especially due to the industrial revolution, and most of the energy requirement was increased so that we had scarcity of energy. So the competition was there. Almost all the countries, entities are fighting each other because of this scarcity of energy. And electricity, when we get the electricity, it played a vital role in energy sector, and it is very much important. That's why I say that in access of electricity, you will feel that how much it is important. So all energy sources are having their own advantages, disadvantages, and since 1950s, this nuclear energy has become a prominent, yet still debatable energy source in the world. So when it comes to the Sri Lankan initiatives, we have done pre-feasibility studies in 1974, that is long back, and 2009 again, and we have sought the cabinet approval for work on this nuclear power plant since 2010. And even Ceylon Electricity Board has identified that we should include this. We should have nuclear power plant to Sri Lanka beyond 2030, and they have included that into the long-term generation expansion plan. And even the good sign is that from 2016 onwards, we are working on 19 issues raised by or identified, introduced by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and all the stakeholders are getting together and we are working for this purpose. And Sri Lanka, luckily, we are having agreements and discussions with many countries on this peaceful use of nuclear power and the nuclear related aspects. So with that, I am going to tell you about this national growth, security perspectives, and introduction of nuclear power plant to Sri Lanka. So I had two main objectives, like to study on the nexus in between economic growth and the energy security, and via that, how we are going to get the national security of the country. And the other important aspect is that to evaluate nuclear security and its impact to the national security by getting most of that, since we don't have nuclear energy, we have to get some examples from the other countries. So that's why I approached for this qualitative methodology. So when we consider about the background, almost all the characteristics, these energy sources must have their own characteristics, like sustainability and reliability. Those are important, and they must be available with sufficiently, and affordability. We have to have access to get them, and the efficiency, and more importantly, environmental friendliness, because we know that because of coal power plants, how much pollution is getting taken place. When it comes to the world electricity scenario, it's like this. As per the 2019 details, coal still leading with 38, and gas followed by hydro 16%, and nuclear has secured 10%. They are catering 10% still in the world. So when it comes to the Sri Lanka, we have coal 47%, whereas we don't have any coal these sources within the country. We have to depend on the other countries, and 48 from the hydroelectricity. But because of raining and all these climatic changes, we have to prepare. It is not stable. It is changing. So when it comes to the analysis, it is obvious that fossil fuels, since we don't have any source within the country, we have to depend on that, and this price volatility will highly impact on this process, and they are non-renewable. Once you use, we cannot use again and again, and importantly, this pollution. When it comes to the renewable sources, it's in other way. So we can think about renewable energies, but they are less reliable. If you don't have sunrise, you cannot retain, and there are many other disadvantages. Also, they are like high capital cost, and we don't have them from the large and sufficient quantities. Especially for developing countries, we have a sustainable energy source, so that it's a question if we are going for this renewable energy. So when I'm doing this research, I found that by using these nuclear power plants, we can have a good, proper capacity, whereas we are having some alternative source, stable, reliable source, and we have sufficiently. We can get electricity with that to run the base load of the country. And these nuclear power plants, they are having higher capacity factor, like shown in the screen. It's 92.2. That by spending less amount of fuel, we can generate a lot of energy. So that is important. And if we have the luxury of having electricity, so it will be cheaper and it will be reliable. So then we can talk about all this national growth, economic growth. But in absence of this electricity in sufficient way, we can have the attraction from the FDI, foreign direct investment, and we can reduce the production cost and increase the living standard. We all will entertain that AC and air conditioning systems, and nobody will tell us that you may switch off the AC in this particular, likewise. So the public transport can be developed by these electric trains and all other facilities, and it will reduce the environmental pollution also. But I agree. You will argue with me that, yeah, there are some bottlenecks. Higher loss of thermal energy, higher capital cost, fear on accidents and leakages, and nuclear safety and security safeguard aspects. So these are the important factor which I am going to highlight. Please remember those factors. I am going to tell you again and again in future. So this why people reluctant to use nuclear is, when I am searching, it was found that there is fear on nuclear bomb, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They all thinking that yes, nuclear means this is the bomb. But we must understand one thing, that that is for a military purpose, but we are talking about peaceful usage. And unawareness of these systems and the inexperience. We don't have experience with nuclear power plants. That is also one aspect. So when it comes to all these disadvantages, higher loss of thermal energy can be compensated by use of these all some other purposes. We can use this heat for some other purpose, likewise. So, and the other capital cost we can compensate by the foreign direct investment, and especially small and mini versions of nuclear power plants are available, and we can get the support from the investors for that. And the nuclear safety, security and safeguard matters. So we can get the assistance from IAEA. So they will support for us. And fear on accidents and leakage. Yes, we will talk. I am going to talk about that in a lengthy manner. Why? Because this is important. As per the Professor Mark J. Perry, they have mentioned that death per terawatt hours by energy source, nuclear, that is 0.04. When it comes to the coal, that is 161 people are dying when they are producing a 1 terawatt hour energy source. So this is quite huge difference in between nuclear and the coal. And so some of the good things, I want to emphasize this to you, so that I will use their statements. So next energy miracle will be nuclear energy. So it's Bill Gates is telling, because of this importance and the possibility of this, and also the love, because more than this nuclear, because of some other electricity generation sources, the people have died or they have come across injuries. And this is quite interesting, because rather than nuclear power plants, people have died because of eating. So it is. She's telling that Diksha, she's telling that it's very. It's better than nuclear power is safer than the eating. So when we think about the nuclear scenario in our region, 132 power plants are there in this region. So Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, even Vietnam, Pakistan, Malaysia, all these countries are having power reactors, operable reactors. They have, and there's a significant combination relationship between gross domestic production and the electricity. This is related to China. So whenever the generation increase, so the GDP also increases. So we have to think on this matter, and I request you all to think even in Sri Lankan aspects also, where we didn't have sufficient electricity. We got some drawbacks in our GDP. And the per capita, that is also, you can see that where we are standing in Sri Lanka, where we are standing, and what about the other countries? Those are, because that's why we are lagging in economic growth and the national growth. And even though we are worried about these accidents and other things, only 3 accidents have been reported, but there's no any threat so far has been reported for this. And we have to use small quantities. And it's very safe to protect because of these small quantities. So when I am to conclude my presentation, what I want to tell you is that the theme of this conference is we are talking about national security and economic growth, national growth. So for that, my argument is that we have to have economic security. For that, we have to have energy security, and we should think nuclear power plants. Maybe not today, but for next 10 years. But we have to lay the foundation today itself to reach this national security. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. I just would like to make a couple of points. One is there is a general tendency for the world to move away from coal, and there is a certain amount of skepticism with regard to the dependence on nuclear power, although the presenter provided ample information with regard in favor of nuclear power energy. 2 other points, that is, so far as the government is concerned, it is planning to have about 70% of total requirement in using natural renewable energy. Whether we will be able to reach that is another matter. Second thing is, of course, against the renewable energy, there is an allegation that is it provides electricity during at least the solar energy during daytime, and nothing is available that is not available during the nights. But company like Tesla, which has made a name for building battery powered cars, are now producing power retaining facilities or battery facilities as large as this building or twice the large of this building. Recently they have done 1 or 2 in Australia, which can store solar energy collected during the daytime for use in the night. So that is one information which is a new technology. Second thing is, of course, Sri Lanka has been talking since 2006, I think, about connectivity with India to connect with the Indian grid. For example, India is now connected with Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, but the submarine cable which we have been talking about connecting India and Sri Lanka has not yet taken place. There is something that has to be considered by the authorities concerned while we think of other kind of alternative energy. Certainly electricity is not a luxury, and we need to give due consideration to the importance of electrical power for development of the economy of the country. With that, I have the next presenter, impact of EU's externalization policies on Libya, presented by DG and Sanjeevani, and Sanjeevani works as a lecturer in international relations and strategic studies at the Department of Strategic Studies, General Sir John Kothalaola Davis University. She has obtained BA Honours and MA in International Relations from the University of Colombo, and she has published a number of research papers on refugees and asylum seekers, common European asylum seekers, post-war reconciliation and national security. You have the floor, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Honorable Chair and the panel. So today I'm going to discuss about the impact of EU's externalization policies on Libya. Basically, first of all, we'll move to this introduction part. Basically, this discussion covers both the EU migration policies plus asylum seekers. So it means all these realities intertwines with the protection of asylum seekers as well. It means it mainly deals with human security as well as the national security. So as you can see here, the main objectives of this study are to analyze externalization policies with regard to the concept of solidarity. Secondly, identify challenges that are available in EU to enhance effectiveness of the common European asylum system. Thirdly, suggest a coordinated approach which can be sponsored by the EU. Well, as we all know, since 2015, the European Union has been faced a lot of difficulties and challenges in accommodating asylum seekers who come from the countries like Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Iraq, Syria, as well as Congo, northern Nigeria. So within this context, most of these influxes of asylum seekers are highly influenced by the eruption of conflicts, political instability, and war in aforementioned countries. So first we'll have an idea about these asylum seekers. Basically, according to Amnesty International, an asylum seeker is a person who has left their country and is seeking protection from persecution and serious human rights violation in another country. The significance is that they have not yet been legally recognized as a refugee, and they are waiting to receive a decision on their asylum claim. So, as shown, as you can see here, the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which was introduced in 2018 by the United Nations, Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, Regular Migration, that mechanism introduced, ensured the political will of international communities to strengthen the international cooperation in implementing effective asylum mechanisms. So within that context, if we analyze the situation in European Union, the Human Rights Watch reports that 101,000 people had arrived at EU borders in 2009 by mid-November. So my concern is that these kind of influxes have created unsettled inconsistencies between migration policies of the member countries and EU norms. That is the main problem. It means the conception of intergovernmental cooperation on asylum policies was first introduced after the signing of Maastricht Treaty in 1992. And then the consequent introduction of the Common European Asylum System was introduced in 1999 by the EU to ensure the international protection of asylum seekers who are living within the member countries. So all these mechanisms, all these suggestions introduced by the EU are mainly based on the concept of solidarity. As you can see here, solidarity delineates the capability of distributing asylum seekers among the member countries. It means it highlights the effective asylum mechanisms or effective burden sharing mechanisms. So according to Article 80 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, both asylum and immigration policies of the EU are mainly governed by two principles called the principles of solidarity and fair sharing of responsibility. With that context, my main argument is that the EU's burden sharing agreement with Libya has undermined the concept of solidarity and has created a bad impact on both Libyan asylum seekers. The the thing is that Libya is not a EU member country, but as an organization, they have made a bilateral agreement with Libya to share asylum seekers who enter this Europe. So, since Libya has been considered as the main transit point of asylum seekers come from sub-Saharan countries to Europe, EU has focused in getting assistance from Libyan coast guards to stop the entries of asylum seekers. So these kind of mechanisms can be analyzed under their specific principle called border externalization policies. But you can see the definition of these externalization policies. Externalization policies define extraterritorial state actions which prevent migrants from entering the territories of destination countries or making them legally inadmissible without individually considering their protection claims. With that regard, the problem is that the externalization policies have become questionable nowadays because EU as an organization has not yet focused on effective transfers of asylum seekers as well as their human security, plus their integration within the country. So these are the problems really. We have to accept that EU mainly stands for the territorial security of the countries. On the other hand, there is a problem about human security of these asylum seekers because nowadays, you know, the concept of conventional migration policies have shifted to strategic border control policies. It means the strategic part, strategic thinking are there. So in that regard, there's a nexus between these so-called externalization policies and xenophobia. Xenophobia means, you know, it creates a fear of asylum seekers as well as it gives an idea that asylum seekers would jeopardize or make threat against their national security. That is the main reason for these kind of externalization policies. So as an example, Africa-EU Migration, Mobility and Employment Partnership was signed basically in 2007 with the aim of stopping the entries of asylum seekers. Under that, as another mechanism, another memorandum between Libya and Italy was signed to reduce the number of asylum seekers. You can see, apart from the organizational side, when it comes to the member countries, and their mechanisms also important because member countries have also made bilateral agreements with non-EU member countries to share their burden with those countries. So, however, these externalization policies deals with the Article 36 of the Dublin Regulation 3, which led states to make bilateral arrangements to share asylum seekers with the member and non-member state. I hope you have heard this W regulation. Basically, the first W regulation was introduced in 1999 to share asylum seekers effectively, specifically within their member countries. Again, Dublin II, introduced by this European Union to make sure that those asylum seekers are getting, you know, effective admission for the asylum claims. And again, Dublin III was introduced to reduce the problems that faced by these asylum seekers. Now, and when it comes to the present context, Dublin IV has also introduced by the European Union, but the problem is European Union couldn't get, you know, majority of votes for this Dublin IV agreement. So that suggestions are still pending. However, the overloaded burden imposed on these EU member countries mainly shows the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of this Dublin regulation. That is my another argument. So from the very beginning, I tried to point out that, you know, this asylum problem is very much connected with this national security. So in theoretical terms, it can be analyzed through securitization theory. As you can see here, securitization theory offers a strategic theoretical foundation for the interconnection between security and migration. So it means it creates fear of illegal migrants and their threats to internal safety. So since we were talking about Libya,
Could you kindly conclude your presentation? We have passed that in minutes' time.
yes, sir.
Thank you.
So within this, I wanted to highlight this legal principle basically, sending asylum seekers to countries like Libya also violates the principle called non-refoulement. Non-refoulement, as you can see here, legally prohibits sending asylum seekers to a country in which they would face dangers caused by the civil disorders. So since time has been passed, I like to conclude my presentation. My discussion mainly concludes that EU member countries have failed in adopting the agreed EU norms as their interests are non-identical, basically interests of non-member countries and member countries. Since Libya has become a gatekeeper, they are facing challenges in accommodating these asylum seekers within their country as well. However, those agreements have not yet created a win-win situation for both sending and receiving countries. It means both Libya and EU. So it means an unresolved question remains in EU member countries on the implementation of asylum procedures. With that, I suggest that it is required to remove inconsistent practice followed by these sending and receiving countries plus European Union. So in that regard, the satisfactory solution is to construct an adequate international scope which can be developed through international cooperation. So finally, protection gaps in the treatment of asylum seekers are also needed to be addressed by the relevant state and legislative authorities as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation as well as the interesting remarks you made. Subject was actually asylum seekers. Sri Lanka has also been in the scene since 1983. I recall about half a century ago, crossing the borders of Europe, no visa, no passport, only with the student card. At the immigration point, they ask, where are you from? And you say from Ceylon at that time. And they ask about how the president was or the prime minister, Mrs. Bandaranaike was or something else, and pay some compliment to the country and let you go. 50 years later, the situation has changed. Illegal migration has taken place. People who are under persecution, or as well as those who are looking for economic benefits are moving across the borders, and countries have to adopt various kind of methods to prevent that from happening and to permit legal kind of migration. So it's a very interesting subject what you brought. Thank you very much indeed. May I, the next presenter is Mr. Oh, we have Mr. Abeyvardhan associated by Karunaratna, Mr. Jayaratna, Gamage, Lakmali, Genovese. Subject is Holistic Approach to National Security of Sri Lanka. Mr. Babuna Singh, Mr. Abeyvardhan is presently a full-time PhD candidate at Tianjin University, People's Republic of China, obtained his BSc Mechanical Engineering from General Sir John Kotalawala Defense University. He also possesses an MBA E-Governance from Kotalawala Defense University. His present research interests include artificial intelligence and machine learning in urban planning and urban security. Thank you very much, and you have the floor, sir.
Dimutu, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Please start.
Thank you very much for kind introduction, sir. Let me share my screen.
Please continue.
Let me share my screen, sir. Just give me a second, sir. There is some problem of sharing it. I think the controller should give me the permission to share this. It doesn't share. Honorable former Ambassador Mr. Bernard Gunathilaka and Brigadier Rajapaksa and other distinguished audience, good afternoon. This is a little piece of research, theoretical research, trying to understand how Sri Lanka's national security should organize in a holistic way. With that, my aim is as shown on screen. I'm going to conduct this presentation in the following sequence. Basically, the first 4 parts are theory, and then the methodology of our research, and finally the conclusion as the holistic view of national security of Sri Lanka. Coming on to the national security, in Oxford Dictionary, it's a very simple definition. It says the safety of a nation against war, terrorism, and espionage. And then the Chinese perspective, like they say, the military aspect is the core, but still it is not the sole value. There are many more to consider. When it comes to the Faruqi, he said there are 5 dimensions, where the first 4 he categorized like firm foreign policy, economy, social cohesion, and the political leadership. And finally, he listed the 5th dimension as the final security factor. Next, what is the national interest? Here, the most important aspect is the value and goals of a country, depending on the people's expectation, what people are expecting to become their country. And on the other hand, the interest and policy should address the test of being practical, because this cannot be brought in an AC room. So it should be politically and practically feasible as a whole. Let's see what prominent scholars in the world have to tell about the holistic approach. This is Professor Martha Crenshaw. She's an expert in terrorism studies. She says a more inclusive conception that explains how a state's full range of resources. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember this word, resources. And the next, is former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Raja Parviz Ashraf. He said, we have to adopt a holistic approach to combat the menace. I urge police to maintain close relationships with the local community. So he's talking about the previous one is the resources. Now he's talking about the process. Next is one of the famous world-renowned political activists, Professor Bruce Hoffman. He says the articulation and development of a comprehensive or the fully coordinated national strategy is not simply an intellectual exercise. So he's talking about the strategy, resources, process, and strategy. Let's move on to some of the approaches of national security from different perspectives. First, I choose the Chinese one. They have the economic, political, social, cultural, and military security, also an international peace, as they are considered factors, but ultimate key is the human security. They consider the ultimate key as human security. let's see the United States of American perspective. So they also have selected economic, border, military, citizens' values. Other than that, the America first foreign policy and also American influence to the world. But still, they also consider their top priority well-being, safety, and interest of the people. Next is the regional powers approach, being the world largest democracy, India. So they also consider economic, political, social, and then law and order, good governance, diplomacy, and military security as their key. But still, they also have the key factors like the right to life, safety, and well-being of every Indian. Next, I would like to select the UN because they don't have any territorial limits. So it's ranging from, they consider from military protection up to human dignity. Yeah, not a single country is going through that in depth to consider this. So they have the other factors as economic, political, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, and community security. So without boundaries, they consider other aspects as well. Let's move on to theories. First, we have selected some components in a holistic approach as we discussed from different perspectives. And then what we did was we got the Global Peace Index 2019. There it clearly listed what are the most peaceful countries and then the least from top to bottom. So we selected first 5, middle 5, and the last 5. And after that, we got the selected components from the most peaceful countries. Obviously, most peaceful countries should have the best components. So after that, parallelly, we did another analysis to understand the threat perception of Sri Lanka, and then we analyzed which related to national security and the threat perception. Finally, we came up with a proposed model to understand the holistic approach of national security. Let's see, this is the summary of my methodology. So you can see from the top, one approach is selecting of components. From the bottom, the threat perception of Sri Lanka, and that analysis post together we develop a comprehensive approach. Coming on to the first part of the methodology, from the capital A, letter A, you can see there are factors from citizen security to information technology. Those are the leading factors which we have considered from the literature, or rather different approaches. And then we selected from the Global Peace Index, we selected the 15 countries, top 5, middle 5, and the last peaceful countries. So then we put together all the information, and we finally got the most peaceful countries components. So far, we have completed 3 steps from the methodology. Next is the threat perception of Sri Lanka. Let's see the threat perception. This is the latest analysis. I'm really happy to see this chairman of the Pathfinder National Security Organization also here present as the chair. So this threats to national security, we got it from the Pathfinder organization's latest literature. So here they have categorized the regional powers and also US, China, and USA, EU, Middle East, all the threats in as a whole, how effective to Sri Lanka. Next, now so far we have completed 4 steps from the methodology. Next is the national security versus threat perception. This is made by our team. We have listed the threats and the components together from the priority basis. We have selected 3 emergence of LTT and the Muslim extremism as the topmost threats, and they are the military security is very important, and then illegal immigrants, illegal fishing, arms trafficking, and human trafficking and drug trafficking are important as where the components comes as citizen security, social security, cultural security, and the homeland security to be included in our holistic approach. And then the LDD diaspora, of course, it's the sovereignty, and then cyber crimes, of course, it's everywhere. So it deals with the information security. And finally, we have selected post-COVID-19 economic threats because it has become a real threat to entire world. So it comes, basically we put it onto the economic security part. Finally, we are in the last part of the methodology. Development of a holistic approach, national security. Here, this is the conclusion of our presentation, where after the methodology, it would come as a conclusion. So we have developed a framework to analyze the holistic approach to national security in Sri Lanka. It has basically it has 4 pillars: sovereignty, military security, information technology in different ways, and citizen security, social security, and cultural security, homeland security, and economic security. We have put together in a one pillar. So this is basically the suggested holistic view of national security of Sri Lanka as per our theoretical research. Floor is open for the question and answering. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Unfortunately, we are far behind time, I think 35 minutes behind time. The subject that we discussed was a very interesting one and a timely one. And I hope institutions of this nature as well as the government would give due attention to the subject, having experienced what we experienced in April last year. With that, I would like to ask whether there are any questions from the audience to be submitted to the presenters. We have a limited time for that. After that, we will have to conclude the session. So, do you have any questions to ask from the presenter? Please tell the name of the presenter to whom you are submitting that question so that it will be easy for that party concerned to respond.
Good afternoon, sir. This question goes to Ms. Niruka Sanjeevani. You were speaking about European Union's responsibility in asylum seekers and the involvement of Libya. Can you clarify how Libya's involvement affects European Union's policies? How it affects European Union policies?
Thank you very much for your question. One thing I need to clarify is the impact of EU's externalization policies on Libya means, as we all know, Libya is a very unstable country. Specifically, after 2015, the country faced a lot of problems and challenges. So with that, Libya is also having problems in accommodating asylum seekers who are coming from the European Union. That is the one concern. Then the second concern is that within the European Union, there are a number of rich countries, resourceful countries to accommodate these asylum seekers. But what they have done is they have created burden sharing agreements with Libya. So which is a non-EU country. So that is another concern because you are asking about the impact on Libya. So in that means the country is not very much capable and resourceful to accommodate asylum seekers. And also, as we all know, within the country there are a lot of problems, even political problems and economic problems, political instability, persecutions. There are a number of problems. So if they welcome these asylum seekers, they have to, live in detention centers. So in that regard, within these detention centers, also asylum seekers face a lot of problems. Even when it comes to the Libyan side also, they have to accommodate, they have to use more people to, monitor these asylum policies. Specifically when it comes to the Coast Guard, as I mentioned earlier, EU has already developed two agreements with Libya to get the assistance from Libyan Coast Guards. So that is a very bad impact made on Libya. Specifically, my main concern is that Libya is not very much capable in handling asylum seekers because as a country, they face a lot of challenges. So rather than going to Libya, within the European Union, there are a number of mechanisms, border sharing, border mechanisms, Schengen agreements, there are a number of agreements. So within that scope, they can, provide shelters for them rather than going for countries like Libya. That is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Junior Officer Cadet Sanjan Piratna. My question goes to Lieutenant Commander Bhavana Singh, sir. Sir, in your presentation, you deeply discussed about the difficulties in introducing nuclear power plants to Sri Lanka, especially regarding the nuclear disasters. In that prospect, we can't forget about the incidents happened in the Chernobyl and recently in the Japan. So the massive nuclear disasters. So if we are going to introduce nuclear power plants to Sri Lanka, before we are putting massive amounts of funds and money on that, we have to think about the worst case scenarios. So in that case, in a case like the Chernobyl, can Sri Lanka resist such kind of a disaster? I mean, can Sri Lanka resist the aftermath of such kind of a disaster? Can Sri Lanka, what could our next step after that, and how can we face to the global response? What is our response? What is our response to the global reaction in such kind of a situation, especially as a country with a comparatively very low demand of energy, comparatively to the countries which are using nuclear power already, like China, India, and United States, Russia, likewise. So, because even we are taking all the necessary steps, we can't be 100% sure. So, mistakes can happen. So, what is our next step? Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. That is very appropriate question. Thank you for your question. What I want to emphasize is that nuclear power plants were there in the world since 1950s, and so far more than 450 nuclear power plants are available. So how many accidents so far reported? That is only Chernobyl, 3 Mile Islands, and as you said that it's in Fukushima, and just the radiation effects they have considered, and there are many arguments. But my argument was that with compared to the other sources of electricity, this is very less amount. 450 are operating for more than 50 years, but it's very limited. That is the point of that accident, how many accidents and the ratio of accidents happening. The other thing is that you said that whether we will be able to control it or the international arena will blame us on. But actually, this with respect to this peaceful use of nuclear power plants, IAEA is the governing authority in the world, and they are very corporate. And without their assistance as well as without their approval, we cannot use. Why? Because if something happen within our premises, it will affect to the other countries also. Still, we are in the range of nuclear disastrous range because very closely we have in Kuda and Kulam we have nuclear power plant. So that threat is there, whether we like it or not. But IAEA and all the other government, all other international organizations, they are very vigilant on that. They are very supportive on this, and they are providing assistance on us. And even for the accidents, after doing case studies, they have come across with what are those are not threats. Those are not because of threats or the attacks. Those are accidents by mistake or some like that. But they have come across with some answers and they are keep on developing these things. So that I don't think that, yes, there's a threat for each and everyone, even water resources, reservoirs, it may damage. So that, that threat is there. But what I am telling you is comparatively it's less, and all the other international authorities are in line with us and they are very supportive in this particular manner.
Since time is going very fast, passing very fast, we have limited time, maybe for one more speaker before we conclude our session.
Sir, I would like to ask a question. I'm Bhagya Senaratna from the Faculty of Defense and Strategic Studies. My question goes to Major Dimuthu.
Yes, ma'am, I'm online.
Yeah. Major, you mentioned about the holistic approach to security, and you brought out 4 different aspects in which you thought security could be enhanced. But I didn't hear you mention anything about the stakeholders that you thought were probably feasible, or stakeholders that should get involved in safeguarding the security, these components of security you identified. Could you perhaps elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. Ma'am, at the beginning of the presentation, I said this is a theoretical research because we have considered to develop a framework to be considered for next action. So this is the bottom line. So from here only we have to start to get these stakeholders and to go for a better strategic plan. So this is the bottom line. That's why we have not considered the stakeholders to be included in the same strategy. This is the basic strategy. Is it clear to you, or
yes,
if you have
thank
any
you.
other? Okay, you're welcome, ma'am.
If there are no more questions, I think it is time for us to bring the session to a conclusion. The subject what we were dealing with was approaches to national security and leadership roles. In discussing this broad subject, we covered from bacteria to viruses, ending up with nuclear power, and in between focusing on asylum seekers and another important subject, which was national security. I am sure that the participants had a fair overview of the 6 different subjects that we discussed, and also realizes the importance of the subjects that we discussed. Obviously, the time available for us to focus on these areas was not sufficient, allowing just simply 10 minutes for the presenter to present their case or argument or subject or whatever it is. But fortunately, unlike our young days, when we had to rush to the library to fight for the remaining books on the book rack, you are very much fortunate, because depending on your interest, you have the ability to go to the internet, download as much information as possible, read them, and then come to your own conclusion with regard to the subject. The subject of COVID or pandemic will be an interesting subject for time to come. As I mentioned, the Spanish flu stayed for 2 years before it disappeared or morphed into a different kind of a virus. But we have no idea how long this particular virus would stay with us in this particular form and format before morphing into something lesser dangerous than what it is today. But this will, if you try to read the material available in the West as well as in the East, Chinese version to it as well as the Western version to it, and of course WHO's position on the matter. There's a vast amount of information that is available for you to see, read, and come to your own conclusions as to what happened or what is happening and how this thing will come to an end. Another important subject what we discussed was foreign policy. It is also important in this current context. As you would have noticed, soon after President Rajapaksa was inaugurated, a stream of foreign visitors, high-level visitors, came to Sri Lanka, met with him. Likewise, currently, you find another stream of visitors coming into Sri Lanka. We have to ask ourselves as to why this interest in Sri Lanka. Is it the country? Is it its location? Or is it the international situation that is prevailing, which prompt them to give such an important position? I recall in 2009 there was a report produced by the United States Senate speaking about or finding fault with the US system for neglecting Sri Lanka and saying that Sri Lanka is an important country geographically, strategically and otherwise, and if you neglect it will be at your own peril. So that is what the one side of the US establishment saw when the Defense Minister, Department of State or Department of Defense was going in a different direction, including the Congress itself. Likewise, today we see various kinds of parties, countries showing an interest in Sri Lanka, as well as the Sri Lanka's trajectory, where we are heading, and they are watching it very cautiously. Take, for example, United States, Japan, Australia, and Canada, forming the Quad as a bulwark against, as they see, against China. And India is there, but not willing to take a strong stand against China because it has an issue in the northern borders. Okay, they will take care of that issue there, but if India were to look southwards or towards the ocean, they see a country called Sri Lanka, and whatever the country does, so the policy is adopted by the leadership, they think that it will have an impact on their own security. So this is something that they are cautious of. As far back as 1949, if I'm not mistaken, K.M. Panikkar was talking about the need for India to bring Sri Lanka and Burma, or at that time Burma, under their control. Another person was talking about the need for India to occupy Trincomalee. Now we are talking about 70 years into history, for its own security. And they say the occupation, whether Sri Lanka or Ceylon likes it or not, they will have to do that. The express view by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru with regard to Sri Lanka was similar. So while India is cautious about the journey Sri Lanka is going to take, and whether it will have an impact on the Indian security is something of concern to that particular country, while we are worried about what could be the impact on Sri Lanka if India were to take a step in that kind of direction, security-wise, how it would impact on us. Then we are also now thinking the US is showing very much interest in Sri Lanka. they wanted to come to certain military kind of arrangements or agreements with Sri Lanka. They have already signed one agreement, AXA. They want to sign another agreement which will put American soldiers, uniforms and boots on the soil. And that agreement has been with us for since 2017, which we have not signed. And I am sure they will ask this question from our government when the major visit takes place end of the month rather. What are you thinking about that particular agreement, which has been submitted to you 4 years ago? One important aspect is the United States will be very much interested in this thing because in the International Court of Justice there is a decision or a judgment against occupation of Diego Garcia by the United States, which had been taken on a lease from the United Kingdom. And if they were to give effect to that, they will have to have alternate locations in the Indian Ocean for them to have bases. Last month they signed one agreement with the Maldivian government. So what would be our position? Where is our policy of neutrality in that regard? These are the things that we will have to look at, study, read about, and come up with our own conclusions. I'm certain you will have a lot more other things to focus on during your studies, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of the second technical session of the 13th International Research Conference of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University. It is our belief that each and every one of you gained much knowledge as we shared interesting and intellectual thoughts for approaches for national security and leadership roles. It is now time to recognize the valuable contribution of the guest speakers here today. In order to present a token of appreciation on behalf of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University, may I now humbly invite Major General M.P. Paris, RWP, RSP, USP, VSP, NDC, PSC, the Vice Chancellor of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University, to the stage. To receive the token of appreciation, let me cordially invite Honorable Chair for today's technical session, Ambassador Bernard Gunatilaka. And Mrs. D.G.N. Sanjeevani, Lecturer, Faculty of Defence and Strategic Studies of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of the second technical session of the 13th International Research Conference of 2020. Please join us for the next technical session here at the main auditorium of the Faculty of Graduate Studies. Thank you.